Welcome to Navigating Love and Immigration. I'm your host, Megan Pastrana. Falling in love is exciting. Maintaining a healthy relationship takes work. And when you're going through an immigration process, you are faced with unique challenges. This podcast is for anyone in a cross-cultural relationship who finds themselves lost in the labyrinth of U.S. immigration. We will interview relationship experts, explore the stories of real couples, and provide important tips on starting the next chapter of your lives together. Immigration. Today, I have a special guest with me. Her name's Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby. Thank you so much for being with us. We're very happy to have you. And I'm reading here from my notes because your background and your work in the world is so beautiful. I don't want to miss anything. So Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a licensed psychologist, a board certified coach, and a clinical supervisor of other therapists. And she's the founder of Growing Self Counseling and Coaching, the author of Exaholics, Breaking Your Addiction to an Ex-Love. I think that's such an interesting title. And the host of the top-rated podcast, Love, Happiness, and Success with Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby. And you've been featured on Oprah.com, Unqualified with Anna Faris, and you're a frequent contributor to the Making It series on CNBC. So thank you again for being here with us. I'm really excited to dive into these juicy topics of long-distance relationships, cultural relationships, and really hear from you on your expertise that you can share with couples who are going through specifically an immigration process. So first and foremost, I'd like to turn it over to you. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your work in the world?
Oh, well, no, I mean, you did such a beautiful job. And I just also wanted to thank and acknowledge you, Megan, for extending the invitation and just to say how impressed I am with your mission of certainly trying to serve people as an attorney, but really working so hard to care for people's emotional well-being and for their relationships in the process of navigating this very challenging life transition. And so I'm very happy to be here and hope I can contribute positive things to the well-being of your community. So thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to your podcast, Love, Happiness, and Success, and really encourage anyone who is, whether you're watching this on the YouTube channel or listening on the podcast, the topics that you cover are just so relevant for all couples, especially couples going through an immigration process. It's just very beautiful and very, very helpful for those who want to really focus intentionally on growing and nurturing their union. So I'd love to dive right into this juicy topic
Yeah.
of long distance relationships. I've actually as I was telling you before we jumped on here to record, our couples and couples who are going through an immigration process for the
Mm.
fiance visa, spouse visa, even you were surprised to find out, wait, what? It's going to take a year and a half
Yes.
or 2 years to get through this immigration process. And
Mhm.
most couples are doing that
Yeah.
across oceans. So a lot of couples have asked me, my husband and I went through it. I've helped thousands of couples. They're always asking, what is advice do you have for those of us who are in this, they call it the LDR, that long distance relationship. It's
Mm.
they feel there's just so much negativity. It just feels frustrating. I'd
Mm.
love to hear, where do you want to dive in with giving advice on the topic?
Oh, well, I mean, there is a lot here to unpack. And I think for couples in this situation, there can be very real stressors that are different from many relational experiences. And I think that they need to be acknowledged, respected, but also attended to intentionally in order to maintain a healthy relationship while they're in the space. So, for example, even just the fact of living apart and having to build separate lives for a period of time. If one person is in the United States and another person is in a foreign country, particularly if there are time zone differences, I mean, it can be difficult to connect. And I think one of the biggest pain points and challenges that any couple faces in this situation is simply how to stay connected in ways that feel meaningful and that feel to maintain that emotional intimacy, to feel like a part of each other's day-to-day life is a challenge. And I think by virtue of having so much distance in the relationship, it can bring up feelings of anxiety, insecurity in the relationship itself that need to be honored and have that be okay to talk about. Um, that's a different variable than a lot of relationships. So it's not just the intimacy, but is it the, are we still together in this? Are you here for me? Do you care about me even if you don't see me every day?
Mhm.
And that's just one, no, two dimensions of a very complex situation.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
as you're talking, I'm thinking about this too, as
Mhm.
those are components that we have to work on even if we're together
Oh,
in
yes,
in the same physical space,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And now you're talking about this feeling connected, this communication, and then the
Right.
anxiety that inevitably arises in all of us as human beings of,
Mhm.
am I loved? Are you like, am I your
Mhm.
person still? Or my couples I know will be going through their own difficulties where whatever in whichever country they might be in.
Mhm.
And it's nice to have that person physically there with you and that disconnection that happens. So all that to say, what are ways that couples can stay
Mhm.
connected? I mean, sure, you can video chat and things like that, but I think there's probably another layer to
Mhm.
that to be able to keep that connection.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you're so right, and I appreciate you bringing that up, that even when you're married and living with somebody, we still have those moments. I've been standing next to my husband in our kitchen before. I'm like, "Are you mad at me? Something seems off." Like
Uh-huh.
having that moment, but then to have that kind of feeling and not be able to talk to your person again for 3 days for whatever reason. I mean, that really it does a lot. And so I think, to your question, what to do about
Yeah.
this is first and foremost to recognize the legitimacy of that need, that in this context, everybody is going to need more overt, more frequent, more intentional expressions of empathy, of care. Like if somebody says, we haven't talked to, or, you didn't answer the phone when I called, or you seem kind of off today, like for both people in that situation to understand that we need to take these moments very, very seriously, because in any relationship there's always such a risk of having these bids for connection be invalidated, sometimes even in subtle ways, like, oh no, I'm just tired, everything's fine, which is okay, that's common, but also like really not recognizing the deeper need and really how important it is. And if that subtle invalidation happens too often, it can really begin to increase the anxiety, increase the risk of damage to a relationship. So I think one of the most important things every couple can do at the very beginning is to say, we're both going to have moments where we're going to need more reassurance, emotional validation. And
Mhm.
empathy is going to be that much more important. And we need to both commit to be giving that to each other, um, generously and often, because it's real.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's beautiful. That's exactly it. And that fear sometimes we have as humans of speaking
Yeah.
our truth because we don't know how to be received. But what I'm hearing from you, what I'm receiving from you, and what I'm hoping our audience is receiving
Mhm.
is that you need to really, maybe at the onset of your immigration journey, have this conversation, recognize these feelings are going to rise, give space for it, and to kind of have a plan for how are we
Mhm.
going to address it and not invalidate one another's
Mhm.
feelings. That
Mhm.
will keep that connection.
Yeah.
Because I have a friend and we've talked about it, and this is kind of what my husband and I do. I think of like a narrative bubble, right? Like what you were saying, being in the kitchen, and I'm like, is my husband mad at me? We've all had those
Mhm.
moments, right?
Yeah.
And then I say, "Can I share my narrative bubble?" It's like, "Is he mad at me? Oh, maybe it's because of this and that." And then you create this whole story that's hasn't even been
Yeah.
checked out. So kind of going through that story that's
Mhm.
in your head is what I'm hearing from you, and
Yeah.
having the other person receive that and give
Yeah.
space. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. I love
Well,
that.
and such a good point, and I think that that too, contributes to the risks of a long distance relationship is when we're not with our people frequently day
Mhm.
to day, we have all kinds of space to create our own stories about what might be happening. And especially if we're feeling more anxious or insecure, it's so easy to begin believing all kinds of things that heighten our emotions and make us feel kind of tense or even upset. So that then when we do connect with our person, through a phone call or a FaceTime, maybe we're coming in hot and sort of no, seriously,
Yeah.
like
Seriously,
ready to like,
yeah.
here's what you're doing, or and unloading stuff in a way that will also um lead to a more tense, a more difficult conversation where
Mhm.
people are more likely to walk away with
Mhm.
hurt feelings or additional wounds because of the conversation itself. So I'm so glad that you brought up the reality of
Yeah.
really needing to do a head check and making sure that you're managing your mindset in a really intentional way so that when you do connect with your person, you're coming up with a lot of generosity, giving people the benefit of the doubt, broaching important conversations, but in a gentle and curious way, as opposed to a, I know what you're thinking kind of way that will never end well, right? That's how fights start. So that mindset piece is really key. We need to keep ourselves in a good place in these
Yeah.
kinds of situations.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it gave me a little bit of a chuckle when you were saying coming in hot because I'm just thinking, yeah, I'm sure we've all done it. It's part of being
Yeah.
human. Like those narrative bubbles like I was referring to, as I call
Mhm.
them, for lack of a better way to describe it, but just like you were saying, that space that you have to think, and then you start imagining, or that if there's
Mhm.
anxiety present and things of that nature, you really could come into a conversation that way, and it can escalate or not go
Yeah,
well. And I and
absolutely.
I and I see that. That's probably really the root of what I see maybe happening with couples. I mean,
Mm.
I'm with them through that 18 to 24-month journey, sometimes many years, depending on the case, where they're apart, and they'll have conflict will arise, and then, they work it out, and sometimes they don't, but it always is. They'll always say it was just we just didn't feel connected anymore. So exactly what you're saying, that coming in and not giving each other that space, validating each other's feelings, and just that disconnection can grow. So this is such amazing advice, and so important for couples to be aware of, so they can know how to
Mhm.
navigate a part of that long distance relationship.
Mhm.
Something else that just came up, that I hopefully you can speak to, is how do couples, since they're not physically together, maintain a level of intimacy? That's something else that couples have brought up to me is, they're apart. It hurts. Like, I just want to hug them, is something that I'll hear couples say. So, do you have any advice on that?
Yes, I do. First, I think one of the easiest things that people in a situation can do is to create rituals of connection that feel meaningful for them. And that can look very different depending on the relationship, but is to talk about what those rituals of connection could be like. If it's finding, a regular cadence for phone calls or FaceTimes. We watch movies together asynchronously on Friday nights, like whatever those rituals of connection are, but really being committed to upholding them in an
Mhm,
intentional way, because that is the point of contact in a relationship for a period of time. But I think an additional layer of depth that you can create here is by talking about love languages as
mm,
how to build those into the rituals of connection. And I think, love languages gets kind of a bad rap. It's pop psychology, whatever. And it's also real. And I think it goes into the fact that we all have different ways of experiencing love and of giving love. And so the person who is like, I just want to give him a big hug, their way of experiencing love could be very physical
mhm.
touch. And so, one thing that couple might consider, I mean, this will sound weird, but I've had people like send a sweatshirt that he's worn a few
Aw,
times to like have that physical something,
yeah.
right? Another person It could be spending quality time together, right? So it could be hanging out on the phone while they're running around their lives or just having meaningful conversations. For other people, it can be very meaningful to be building a future, so talking about future plans and feeling like they have a partner in that. And so there's not one right way to create connection that everybody should do. But the work here is having a conversation with your partner around what love could really look like and feel like in the context of the separation, and then building rituals of connection that respect what those are, because they're not going to be the same for everybody, or even two people in the same relationship have differences.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love I love hearing all of those examples. The sweatshirt thing, my husband and
Mhm.
I loved that because that's the
Um,
physical touch, I love that. And so when
mhm.
we would have an opportunity, when we'd have that time together, I was like, leave your sweatshirt." And he's like, "Why?" And I was like, "'Cause he wanted to wash it." I said, "No, don't wash it." So "It smells like
Yeah.
you." And I have a lot of couples that tell me they do that, or even if they are on different time zone and it's breakfast and dinner, they might
Mhm.
eat together. They'll have
Yeah.
their and then they sit there and eat as if they were, together, physically together and have conversations,
Yeah.
or just, random voice memos throughout the day or I just love hearing from couples the way that they
Mhm.
stay connected. And those are excellent, excellent
Yeah.
suggestions.
Mhm.
And I loved your podcast, and I'll definitely put a link to the podcast episode that you talked about long distance relationships. And as I said earlier, a lot of couples feel like, "Oh, I'm in a long distance relationship. It's so annoying." And it's kind of that frame or that mindset or that focus of it being negative. But
Mhm.
I loved that episode that you have because you talk about what are the positive things that can come out of this.
Yeah.
Because as I love that quote, "Pressure can bake burst pipes or make diamonds." And you were
Mhm.
giving examples of how being in this relationship long distance, a short period of time, can actually be good for your relationship. So can you expand on
Yeah.
that topic?
In so many ways. And truly, to look at the long distance relationship experience as a chapter of your relationship that can be very special and something that you might even look back on fondly years later. And I think an easy example of this, as so you mentioned that you're married. I too am married. And one of the realities of being married and living with somebody day to day for a long time is that it gets routine. It can get
Yep.
even a little bit boring, dare
Yep.
I say, right? And so it's just that whatever. People in long distance relationships get to plan vacations to come together when they haven't seen each other in weeks or maybe months, and have it be really special in a way that has this like new relationship, like romantic kind of quality that can the reality is that can fade, or it need to be like created somehow in a long-term marriage where you are together day to day, and you're not going to have that kind of magical moment experience of being so excited about seeing your partner and can't wait and picking out all these little special outfits and the vacation and the reunion and how magical it all is. And that is such a beautiful experience to have, especially if you've been with somebody for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So it's kind
Yeah.
of keeping the romance alive in that way.
For sure. Yeah,
Mhm.
I love looking at it that way. The newness, because it is easy in life for things to become a little monotonous. You easily can fall into a routine. But to start planning for a future
Mhm.
trip,
Mhm.
or when you're apart like that, what I'm hearing from you too, something I was reflecting on is when you're apart like that and you're, career focused. That was in
Mhm.
your article too. If each person is focused on their career or their
Yeah.
studies, and then when you have time to talk and connect,
Mhm.
you're learning all these things about their day or their week,
Mhm.
that maybe if you were together all the time, you would know, and maybe you wouldn't ask about as much because you
Mhm.
think because you see them all the time. So
Yeah.
that's really beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, oxygen, eh,
Mhm.
gives life to fire. And to a degree, spaciousness really does the same thing for romantic relationships when there's so much togetherness and day to day, and you know what everybody has been doing. It can feel like there's nothing to talk about, but to really have time and energy and space to invest in having interesting and rewarding personal lives. And then, having so many interesting and fun things to be talking about when you do come together is something that can really give this relationship a very special energy that might fade when you're
Mhm.
together day to day,
Yeah.
unless you're keeping it alive very intentionally.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And another topic, one of the other juicy
Mhm.
topics that I mentioned that I wanted us to dive into is cross-cultural relationships. For
Oh,
so many
yeah.
of our couples, yeah, obviously, they're marrying someone or engaged to someone from another country, and so there's different cultures, and that's so rich and so beautiful, but sometimes I've seen with couples that they're like, "Wait, you don't see the world the way that I do," and there can be conflict, and so, you had an article on this, so I'd love to have you,
Yeah.
dive into this topic as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you're bringing this up. And first of all, it must be acknowledged. I'm saying this as a marriage and family therapist that everybody in every relationship comes from very different cultures,
Yep.
even if it seems like there's a lot of commonality in terms of your, culture of origin, your ethnicity, your socioeconomic status. Those could even be similar. And yet the cultures of our families can be quite different in terms of the way that values were prioritized and expressed, the way people communicate or show love, what it means to be a family, gender roles. Like, I mean, people living next door to each other their whole lives can have vast differences when it comes to these kinds of things that will commonly create conflict and friction points in a relationship because people come in with these subconscious expectations about how things should be, that when
Mhm.
their partner is not conforming to the how things should be, it's, "Oh, what's going on?" Not fully realizing that they're really seeing the relationship through the lens of their own upbringing, which is quite unique to them. So this is part of the work that every couple in every relationship
Yep.
always needs to do. And the distance between, what is normal and expected in terms of, the way we were each raised can be more different, obviously, when it comes to extremely different cultures. And so what is really important here is to approach this with the expectation that those differences exist and to come into it with a spirit of curiosity.
Mm,
You were raised in a different family, culture, environment that had a whole different set of not just values, expectations, but like these unwritten rules to live by that you might not even be consciously aware of because it was just like your whole life. And I'm so curious to understand what those are and to help you understand what mine are so that we can see what those differences are so that they don't create problems for us in the future, because that's where conflict arises if you want, need, or expect somebody to be behaving in a way that they're not doing, because why would they? It can create
mhm.
a lot of hurt feelings without even understanding the cause half the time.
Yeah. And I'm
um,
sure and I'm sure and I know being married, it can be even little things like how you do the dishes and things,
mhm.
yeah, things of that nature. And it's the curiosity. So coming into that, being
Yeah.
curious, and that's something that if, couples, especially if in a long distance relationship, maybe that could be a fun exercise to go through. How do you do certain things and why?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's when you were talking, I thought, "Oh, that's so interesting about the curiosity." Have you heard that story about the Christmas ham where they cut the ends of the ham off and it was like a family tradition?
Oh, yes. So why
I
why do
was
we do
actually
that?
like, "Oh." Yeah, so for those who are watching or listening, it's this family and they cut off this generation, they were cutting off the ends. The husband was like, "That's what we have to do. You gotta cut the ends of it off and, put it in the oven." And then he asked, she's like, "Well, why?" The wife's like, why do you do that?" And I'm paraphrasing, I might not be getting the story totally correct, but you'll get the idea. So he asks his mom, and she said, "Well, that's because that's what we do. You cut it all off the ends, and then you put it in the oven." And so she asks her mom, and she's like, "Oh, well, we do that because our oven was too small for it to fit, so we had to cut that off so they could fit in there." So my husband and I love that story, and so we just got curious about why does our family do what they do? And sometimes you ask, and then we've learned, well, why don't we create our own ways of doing
Oh,
things
yes.
as our
Mhm.
unit? Why
Yeah.
we don't always have to, do things the way that we think, our
Mhm.
family had taught us. So that curiosity is
Curiosity.
key, is what
It
I'm
really
receiving.
is. And also, I mean, just for the benefit of your listeners, I mean, I am of the belief that every single couple always has growth work to do together in order to have a really good relationship, and that premarital counseling, like real deal, high quality premarital counseling, especially coming together after a long distance relationship or from different cultures, is so important. And so one of the things that honestly is kind of a pet peeve of mine. I don't want to get on my soapbox, but a lot of times couples getting married will do premarital counseling, which is like two or three awkward conversations with like the priest and a worksheet, or it's like
Mhm.
it is not meaningful growth work, but they have to do it. They like check the box. Yes, we did premarital counseling, compared to going into a very deep growth experience. So, for example, with a marriage and family therapist who provides premarital counseling that goes into an assessment of all these different domains of a relationship to understand where the commonalities are, even things like around money. What kind of relationship do you want to have with your in-laws? Like, what does normal mean to you? And one of the tools that a marriage and family therapist will use in order to get clarity and visibility into that is something called a genogram. And it's a way of actually diagramming people's families and extended families to have very intentional conversations about cultures, belief systems, who's who, what's what, that generates this real understanding of why we are the way we are, what are the cultures that we came from, and then being able to very thoughtfully design what do we want the culture of our new family to incorporate that is kind of the best of both worlds. And I think that having constructive and intentional conversations like that helps you unpack it further and dig a little bit deeper oftentimes than you do just in regular conversations. But it also, I think, um, pushes both people into this space of understanding that each other's ways of being are legitimate, because
Mm,
that's where the fights start, is when
yeah.
one person believes either consciously or unconsciously that my way of being is actually the right way. But to have it all mapped out and to be intentionally making space for each other's way of being in this new family that they're creating together, it creates such a strong foundation, and it prevents so many problems long term. So, again, being from cultures that are very different can often create motivation to get in there, know that you need help to bridge the gaps and do the work in a way that couples coming in, assuming that they're a lot more like than they actually are, can be such a strength of couples who are in long distance relationships or cross cultural relationships. So it's a gift, truly.
Yeah. It does. It sounds like it. I know for some couples it's, "Oh, we're identical, we're just alike." But then when you start to dig, no, but nobody is. And
Yeah.
I love this. You said it's a genogram? Gen
It's
ho
called a genogram. Yes,
genogram.
it's an assessment tool that a licensed marriage and family therapist will use. And so for your listeners who might not know, so there are many, flavors of therapists and counselors, but only marriage and family therapists that have specialized education and training that really focuses on relationships and family systems
Mhm.
and other kinds of so like I'm also a licensed psychologist. Nobody even talked about genograms in my doctoral program. This came from education and training as an MFT. So if you want to have that kind of experience, that is what you would look for. Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way. I can see the curiosity in there, getting
Mhm.
curious about each other's way of being and being open to I might not have just the one right way and then see your partners, but to create that whole
Mhm,
new culture for
mhm,
your family
mhm,
unit. I think that's very, very
mhm,
helpful and advice and very interesting.
mhm.
Well, thank you so much for being here with me today. I've loved our conversation. Again, I want to give a shout out to your Love, Happiness, and Success podcast. I think it's just such beautiful material. We'll definitely post links. And did you want to share any other links or websites or anything for individuals who want to get in contact with you?
Oh, certainly. Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, the website certainly, and that is growingself.com. And so for any of your listeners, because I really I have a heart for service, I think like you do, Megan. And so, in addition to the counseling and coaching work that we do, I've put together so many free articles and resources for people who are dealing with all kinds of different life experiences. And so if you come to the growingself.com, go into the blog and podcast page, enter into the love collection, we have whole collections curated just for long distance relationships, premarital counseling, those kinds of things. So there's articles, podcast playlists, different activities that you guys could do together, that will support your journey of growth together.
I
Yeah.
saw that. I was in there playing and looking. It was
Oh,
very I was
yeah.
very, very excited about everything you have. I think
Oh,
there's tons of we'll definitely make sure those links are shared for our viewers
yeah.
and listeners. So there's
Especially that long distance
yes.
relationship collection, because I know there's a lot there for them.
There's a
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. That was one of my favorites, and it was answering a lot of questions that I know the couples that I serve have. So we'll definitely make sure to post that independently as well,
Oh,
so
wonderful.
everybody can easily access it. Well, thank you again for being here with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure,
Thank you.
and yes, and I love your work in the world. So thanks again.
Well, thank you again for the invitation. It was my pleasure.